Hey, everybody, this is Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. Welcome to, as always, the Hammerheads Show with me, my friend, my co-host, Rob Shue. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing very well, Jack. Enjoying this fine Monday, first day of summer. We're talking about that before the start of the show. We have sun in Portland. It is something to behold. 70 degrees and sunny on the first day of summer. I'm loving it.
That is great to hear, especially with I know what the weather's like up in Portland can be not so sunny. So it's good
Yes,
to hear that at least you have that out, and it's only 70 degrees, which sounds like a beautiful day.
It's delightful. Got out for a nice walk earlier. Got some exercise. Feeling good.
There you go. There you go. Really quick before we get started, got a couple people to shout out. Raphael 56 New Niners. He's actually a member of the Toolbox. Sorry, as you can see there, it says he says, "What's up, Jack, Rob, and everyone? How you doing, Raphael? Great to have you on board." And then we have Peter. He says, "How's it going, gents?" As we just said, it's a good day. It's good up in Portland. It's not too hot here in California either. Only about 93 where I am right now. So I'm able to make it through. So I'm looking forward to getting down, talking to some 49ers. If you've followed the Hammerhead Show at all, you know that Rob and I go back in terms of our 49ers. Our knowledge. We've been around for a little while, so we've, and the two of us are old school 49er fans, and now I cover the team when we date back to the 80s, and so we're going to get into a bit of that later on in the show. But for right now, I wanted to start off with some of the current 49er stock, and there's nothing that really grabs the attention of 49er fans more than talking about quarterback, right? It doesn't matter whether you're talking about Jimmy Garoppolo or probably even Elvis Gerbach back in the mid 90s.
That's right.
An old name. Heck, if you remember, there was a mayor of San Francisco one time who was quite critical of Elvis Gerbach after a loss. I think it was, I don't remember. I think it was to the Cowboys, if I could correct. I'm not sure, but there was definitely the mayor of San Francisco, good old Willie Brown, was not a big fan of Elvis Gerbach.
Right.
So we're going to get into that, though. We're going to start off, today's quarterback is Trey Lance. And everybody pretty much knows Lance is going to be the starter this year. I know the Niners haven't officially announced it, but that's the direction they're going. Rob, what are some reasons for you to be optimistic about what's going to happen with Trey Lance in 2022?
Well, I'm glad we started in this direction, Jack, because I am, an optimistic guy at heart. And so I like to begin on the positive, looking at reasons that we can be optimistic around Trey Lance. The one that I like to throw out there that seems like a logical continuum to me, that it's easy to get to this hypothetical that I'm about to throw out there, is that had Lance decided to stay in school, it's a very real possibility he would have been the number one overall pick in this year's draft, right? He would have been clearly the most coveted quarterback coming out of college if he had gone back to North Dakota State and had himself another great season. That doesn't feel like a stretch. He had an undefeated season wherein he threw 0 interceptions. It would not be a stretch at all for him to come back, throw a couple of picks, maybe not be undefeated, but still have a wonderful season there at North Dakota State. And again, come out this season as the most exciting quarterback prospect in this draft. That's the kind of excitement that I still have about this young gentleman, that he could have been the number one overall pick this year.
Yeah, that's a really good one, because he would have been the number one overall pick in all likelihood. The only way I don't think he would have been is if some of the other guys that came out with him had decided to stay in as well. That's the only caveat to that.
Right.
Because otherwise, if he had stayed in, I don't have any doubt that he would have been, because the guy won an NFL game last year against a decent defense in Houston, and played really well in that game, and was only 7 points away from defeating an undefeated Cardinals team in his first NFL start, and might have done it if there weren't a lot of mistakes from players around him on the offense that day. So
right,
I'm with you on that one. I think that's a really good one. For me, I'm going to go with I think the easy one is the growth that I've seen, and that's kind of a really big one. But just he has grown into, I think, what we saw of him at North Dakota State, which was a guy who was as a freshman was the player of the year at that level. He won the award for the best player in the FCS level as a freshman, and led North Dakota State to an undefeated record, which people can say what they want because they're kind of the Alabama of that um, portion of the NCAA, right? They're just they steamroll through there. But
Right.
It was a fantastic season for him that 1 year that he played there, and I think we saw that carry on and really come out in his game against Houston. So for me, it's just the growth that we've seen from day one in camp to the game against Houston.
Yeah, I would echo that. I also have in there the improvement from week 5 against the Cardinals to week 17 against the Texans, and even going one step further, the first half against the Texans versus the second half of the Texans. That improvement that you continued to see in Trey Lance. Now, going back in uncovering the secrets of last season after hearing Trey Lance talk about his injury, after hearing Kyle Shanahan talk about the way in which things unfolded earlier in the year, it makes a little bit more sense what we saw against Arizona in the first game plan. So you can almost take that game and set it aside, but I would look at the way in which Trey Lance performed in that game, regardless of the game plan, versus how he looked against the Texans. And again, it just seemed to show marked improvement. You would assume that were he to continue to get reps, that there would continue to be that level of improvement. Maybe not the level that we saw from week 5 to week 17. That was a pretty marked improvement in my estimation, but it certainly showed an upward trajectory. And that's what I'm going to be looking for this season as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And one other thing on that game in Arizona, I think if you go back to that game, I know, the numbers don't look good. There was a number of balls that he threw away, I think on purpose, that helped kind of drive down the completion percentage. But like I said, they didn't lose that game because of Trey Lance. They lost that game because of a lot of other things. Just inconsistencies along the offense in terms of holding. Every time it seemed like they took a step forward, they took 2 steps backward in that game.
Yeah. I mean, that was the game with considerable holding penalties. Wasn't that also the game where Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle both fumbled in that game?
No, that was the Cardinals game at Levi's.
That was the other Cardinals game. I mean, that was a game where you had both safeties out, so the defense wasn't quite what you would have expected it to be. So, yeah, I would agree that particular first game against Arizona for Lance was a tough one.
Yeah. And what is your next reasoning behind being optimistic with Lance?
I got to go with the players and the coaches being wowed by his athleticism and the playmaking ability in practice. You take that with a grain of salt because what do you expect them to say? But several of these players in particular that came out to talk about Trey Lance were unsolicited. So when a coach says something about the player, especially when asked by the media, you can wonder, well, what are they supposed to say? Are they going to come out and say, well, he's a young gentleman and he's struggling right now? That would fly in the face of reason. You want to build up your young quarterback. You want to say positive things about him. But when it's an unsolicited comment, particularly from teammates and teammates on the defensive side of the ball, or the way in which I've heard Trent Williams speak about Trey Lance, Brandon Ayuk, many players have come out and said convincingly what they're seeing from Trey Lance matches up with the physical skill set that I saw on tape coming out of college. So I'm going to choose to believe those individuals are speaking highly of him in truth and not just in hyperbole.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And when you talk about I understand, I can get where you're saying where guys could just be saying it because they're teammates, and what do you do? But the one that jumped out to me was the Fred Warner comments last year during the season, because he brought those up without anybody even bringing it up. He just kind of brought that up out of the blue.
Yeah.
And so I think that one really speaks volumes, and you've heard it from other people since then. And I think the other piece to it is you watch them on the field, like at least I see him on the field, that saw him on the field during OTAs and minicamp, and you saw a guy who matches what you're hearing from the players as well. It was a little bit of both. I mean, I can understand if you weren't there and you're just hearing the comments or just reading them there, but you didn't see the action on the field, why you might second guess it. But when the two match up, it makes it a little more realistic for me.
I agree.
Yeah. And then real quick before we go on, I just want to hit a couple of comments over in the comment section. We have Jeremy Price. Thank you for the super chat, Jeremy. He says, long time, my brother. Warriors had my attention. Hey, Jeremy, it's great to have you back. I haven't seen you for a long time. I was wondering if maybe you just didn't like me anymore. But no, I'm kidding. It's good to have you on, because I know that you used to always be in the comment section all the time and call in when I do call-in shows and everything. So it's great to have you on. Thank you for the donation as well. Also, just want to throw out a couple of other ones. We have Harold, who's always in the comments. He says, "Good day, everyone." And then
hello, Harold.
Ellen says, "Jack and Rob, happy Monday."
Happy Monday indeed.
Happy Monday. And then real quick, we got Andrew over here, and he says, "Hello, Rob. You and Jack are my favorite shows every week."
Gotta love that.
And then he says, "Who's in charge here?" Nope, nobody's in charge. The inmates are running the asylum around this place.
Yeah, this is definitely a case of the inmates running the asylum.
And then we got real quick, we got CJ Ruthas. He says, "Yo, so good to have you on board too, CJ." Real quick too, before we get on to the next topic, I just want to shout out really quick because I mentioned at the beginning the Toolbox. I have that membership up, so if you want to join, become a member, please do so. We've got a lot of fun things planned and working on some shirts as well. So I might be bumping up the price of that third tier of the membership package. But hey, at least for 1 month subscription, you get a free T-shirt and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And then you can always bump it back down to one of the lower levels if you want. So let's get that rolling. So we started off on the positive track with Trey Lance. I think we're both of the mind that for most part he's going to have a solid season this year. What are some things in your opinion, Rob, to believe that Trey Lance might struggle this year?
I think the biggest one, and this is just logically speaking, the biggest one is that he is an unknown. I believe even those that are optimistic, and I would put myself in that camp as someone who is optimistic on Trey Lance, I also have to begrudgingly admit that we haven't seen enough on tape. We haven't seen enough at the NFL level to definitively say that things are going to go in a positive direction. And so that leaves it up to interpretation. And for me, again, an optimistic individual who wants to believe that Trey Lance, with his work ethic, is going to be able to climb the ranks as far as quality quarterbacks within the league. If you were to flip the script on that and say to yourself, well, I'm a naturally pessimistic individual. I like to see things with my own two eyes before I actually believe it. I'm not going to get out ahead of this and say Trey Lance will do this until I start to see some concrete evidence that he has done this. And so if you're skeptical, if you are the type of person that wants to see him prove it first, you could say to yourself, no, we're going to see the same Trey Lance that had his ups and downs last year. I would expect him to have his ups and downs this year. We have a suspect offensive line, so maybe he won't have enough time to really get comfortable right away. So I would expect him to have a struggle early on in this season as he's acclimating himself to this offense full time.
Okay. Yeah, and I kind of, I agree with you. I do think there's going to be some ups and downs, and the fact that he's a first-year starter could be a reason for concern with Trey Lance. So I think we're on the same page with that one because there definitely is that piece of the puzzle too. Is he going to be able to come in and just jump right off the page, right off from the get-go, hit the feet running and get rolling, and that's a cause concern. I think the one for me that is a little bit different is he going to be willing to take the chances that need to be taken?
That's a good one.
Because it's one thing to have the big arm and make the throws when they're wide open, but sometimes the big throws aren't the throws that are 40 yards down the field. Sometimes those big throws are the ones that are 20 yards over the middle instead of taking the check down, or 15. The intermediate route that's wide open behind the linebackers, but you're not quite sure of it, so you check it down to the guy underneath. We saw that in the NFC Championship game with Jimmy Garoppolo, for instance, on a couple of plays. So that's my thing is, does he? And we saw that from him on film at North Dakota State at times where he would not, get out the ball out of his hand if it wasn't a clear sight, right? If the guy was maybe behind a linebacker a little bit, but there was room, but he just couldn't see it from the pocket. So I think I saw some improvement from him last year with that. But is that going to be something that he can do throughout? Is he going to be able to make those throws, take those chances, and hit them when they're there?
That's a great call out because those windows are just even tighter at the NFL level than they ever were at North Dakota State. And he showed a conservative nature in attempting to limit those turnovers, right? And that's appreciative when you get a season where you don't turn the ball over. But I think it was Fred Warner came out at similar time where he was talking about Trey Lance last season, and he talked about needing to get Trey Lance to push the ball more in practice, to take more of those risks. And I, for one, am in the camp that assumes we will have some bigger plays next year because we will push the ball down the field. We will push the ball outside the pockets, but in outside of the numbers. But in order to do that, you have to take some of those shots. You have to be willing to take chances. And if Trey Lance plays a little too conservative, that may actually work against him in that regard. We may want him to have a few more turnovers and a lot more big plays.
Yeah, and that's kind of where training camp comes in. You'd like to see those turnovers, those shots being taken now. And I will point to one play in mini camp, and it was the throw to Brandon Ayuk in the red zone drill that they were running, where it wasn't the sure throw. There was another throw that was maybe a little bit more open, but it was going to be short of the goal line. So he took the shot into the end zone. He took the risk, and it should have been a touchdown. The receiver made the mistake. And so in situations like that, does he bounce right back? Does he keep firing? Does he keep grinding and taking those shots into those tight windows that are there? So that's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, most definitely. One of my concerns that still remains is whether Trey Lance has taken considerable steps in the offseason work he's done on his throwing motion and in specifically on the touch on the short passes. I thought I saw a lack of touch from Trey Lance last year, right? It seemed like he just had the one velocity, even on some of those shorter passes. And you would see a sharp drop off in Yak if he were unable to complete some of those shorter passes within Shanahan offense, right? Especially some of those over the middle where Jimmy was so good at putting the ball directly on players when he wasn't throwing it to a linebacker out of, just good natured throwing it to the other team. But with Trey Lance, if you had a high velocity ball over the middle that isn't caught, right, that can lead to a turnover in its own right because it bounces off of the receiver's chest, bounces off of the receiver's hands, and now it's in the middle of the field of play and it's up for grabs. Anybody can go get that ball. So if he's unable to deliver those touch passes on the short passes, it could, to me, be a cause for concern with regard to Yak.
Yeah, that's a really good one because we saw that last year, especially early on, right? We saw that with the receivers not being able to hold on to the ball for whatever reason. And it's really the shorter passes, like the ball over the middle, the Deebo Samuel against the Chargers in the preseason game. Those, it wasn't right on him. It was a little behind him, but it should have been a catch. It was like right here,
right.
Those. So yeah, I'm with you. And that is something that we've seen some, at least to my eye, it looked like we had seen some improvement on during the OTAs and minicamp was a little bit more touch on those passes. He's got a strong enough arm. He doesn't have to use that that full strength every time. If he just takes a little bit off on those underneath routes or even those 10, 15 yard routes, he's got plenty of arm to where he doesn't have to throw it at 100%.
Right.
To get it there. He can take a little bit off there, put it easy on their hands and let them run with it. And it seemed like we saw some of that during OTA. So that's a real good one. For me, the other one would be, it's kind of similar to what you're talking about from a throwing motion standpoint. Is he going to be more consistent with his head level and his hips? He has a tendency at times to kind of sink his hips. I didn't see it quite as much last year as I saw on film when he was at North Dakota State. So maybe he's rectified that. But part of the reason when you're dropping your hips and you're kind of bouncing your head, it makes it hard to be accurate because you're think of it as like you're shooting a BB gun, right? If you're trying to shoot it and you're going like this with your head, it makes it hard to aim to the target. It's kind of the same thing as a quarterback. If your head's bouncing or your hips are dropping, you're not keeping a solid lock on the target. And so that can cause some inaccuracy with your throw. So some of the mechanical pieces with Trey Lance, it's hopefully he's cleared that up.
And I would say that my last one is a mechanical one as well. And with all three of these, it will be interesting to observe that while we're in OTAs, while we're in preseason, while we're in practices, these things may be pretty natural for Trey Lance. There was, reported work in the offseason on these throwing motions, on his throwing motion and other throwing mechanics. But once we get into live fire, once people are actually coming at him, once we're in the preseason games, once we get into the regular season, it will be interesting to view whether those mechanics revert at all or whether he has done enough work, enough repetitions to keep those mechanics where he got them to this offseason. But the last one I had in there it's one that I believe is overrated, but it got a lot of run last offseason, the wobble. The wobble is the last one in there. Those high velocity knuckleballs at times early in the season. It seems less wobble this season, although again, very few recorded passes that I have seen. Once we get into camp, I'm guessing that we'll have a lot more video to go over where we can dissect it. I, again, thought it was a little bit overblown last year, but it goes back to throwing a catchable ball and not always having to put the most velocity on it, making sure that you give your receiver the best chance to come down with the reception. It seemed like an issue, even though a small issue that got overblown during the preseason last year. Again, once we're under live bullets, it'll be interesting to see if he is able to keep that spiral tight.
Look at Rob coming with Wobblegate again. You know, I was hoping we'd put that behind us yesterday with with my 49ers according to Jack about those who keep wanting to talk about wobble on the throw. I mean, all you gotta do is watch Joe Montana throw the ball. How many times did he throw the ball with a wobble? There's plenty of them. But no, I get what you're saying, because when the ball is wobbling, especially if you're throwing it at a high velocity, it can be hard to catch. I mean, you know, I have a hard time catching it from my kid when he throws it and it's not a spiral. Heck, I have a hard enough time catching when he throws it to me as hard as he can and it is a spiral. So, you know, I understand what you're saying there. And that's where if he's, you know, maybe taking a little bit off and throwing a little bit more touch, even if the ball's a little wobbly, it's going to be easier for it to be caught. One other thing on that, you know, when we look back, people have made a lot of comments about that and how tough it is to catch. But you got to remember the people who are dropping the ball usually from him weren't necessarily, you know, Brandon Ayuk and you know, I know Deebo Samuel did, but Deebo Samuel was struggling with drops early in the season to begin. Regardless, you know, there's a reason why Mohamed Sanu isn't on the team and wasn't receiving passes from 49ers quarterbacks over the second half of the year. So I think that goes along with it too.
I think you're spot on about that. The 49ers have upgraded their wide receiving core this season. I would expect fewer drops.
Yeah. 100%. And then let's move off of Trey Lance a little bit. I think we know what Trey, you know, we put that out there. Let's move to another area of the team. Let's go to the running back room. How do you see the running back room shaking out for the 49ers this year?
This is an interesting one, Jack, because I want to pull for a surprise here, because to me, a surprise seems like the way in which we have a breakout star. Let me tell you a little bit about how I sort of view that. I think Ty Davis Price is going to be a lock in there. TDP, a lock. Elijah Mitchell, got to be a lock, right? Your leading rusher from the past season. And Trey Sermon, to me, a third-round pick from last year, it would be tough to move off of him. It would take a really, really atrocious camp for Trey Sermon, in my opinion, to work his way off of the starting roster. Now, I'm viewing it as 4 running backs plus juice, right? So the 5 in the room. So I've got a spot for one more halfback in there. If it is someone else other than Jeff Wilson Jr., or JaMycal Hasty, that feels like, oh, this is an unknown. This is someone who could come in and be this year's Elijah Mitchell. This could be someone who is the next undrafted star that Kyle Shanahan has stumbled across. Whereas if it is Jeff Wilson Jr., who, if I'm putting it out there, I believe has the highest potential to grab that 4th spot, I wouldn't expect a huge jump in production from last year. I would expect him to be healthier, right? It would be that health that earned him that last spot in the running back room. So maybe closer in what we saw in 2020 and some production that we have seen from Jeff Wilson Jr., which would be nothing to scoff at. But I would like to see a breakout. And so I would love to see Jordan Mason take that role. I have heard from a certain someone that he's looked good. But I will say I'm predicting right now that it goes to the vet, that Jeff Wilson Jr. ends up grabbing that last spot.
Okay, so you're going with Jeff Wilson Jr. and that's good. I mean, I agree with you that the top 3 I think are pretty well set. I agree with you. I think it's going to be Elijah Mitchell. I know the Trey Sermon, whatever you want to, you don't use a 3rd round draft pick on a running back and just dump him after a year. He's going to be, I think he's going to make the team. He's one of the 3, and I think Terry and Davis Price is the other. So I think those 3 are locked in. Part of that is just my feeling, and then also when Kyle Shanahan was going through during the state of the franchise, he mentioned those 3 by name. That was it. He didn't talk about any of the other ones. So that kind of leads me, that's me reading into some comments there a little bit. So I think those are your 3. And then the 4th one's going to be an interesting one because Jeff Wilson Jr. does show some things and have the ability to do multiple things within this offense. He can be a halfback. He can be a fullback if they need to in certain situations. Really, he becomes a fullback in a way. So he can that allows them to almost be like a 3rd down back and have him on the field with Kyle Juszczyk in a way. So it's going to be interesting to see if it. I think the battle really comes down to him and the undrafted rookie Jordan Mason. I think that it's going to be between those 2. And if I'm the 49ers, I would lean more towards the Jordan Mason route because I think he brings something that the other running backs on the 49ers don't bring, and that explosiveness that he has. I think he's the most explosive back on the team at this point. I think the other 3 that we talked about earlier, really good, be strong between the tackles backs who can, get you some big yardage, but they're not going to take it to the house. I think that Mason is the guy that can maybe do that for him. So that's why I kind of lean more in his direction. But the one thing that I think it's tough at that last running back spot, and it's also going to be something to think about when you look at who the 6th receiver is going to be, for example. Those guys have got to be able to play special teams. And I think that's where Jeff Wilson Jr. might get the nod over him.
That's a great point. And it does seem when you're comparing the 2 with Jeff Wilson Jr., you have a very well-rounded back, someone who knows the system. It's almost, I would almost equate it to keeping Dante Johnson on the roster with Jeff Wilson Jr. Like it's not going to be super exciting in that regard, but it is someone who can play multiple positions, is good across the board. You're not looking at a breakout candidate most likely, but you're looking at a very high floor for that individual.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, even when you go back to last year and you look at Jeff Wilson Jr., for example, he was, not 100%. He was struggling when he was running the ball. And it got to the point where his role really became to be, they'd get into 11 personnel and he'd be the running back on the field. But in reality, he was the fullback for Deebo Samuel in a lot of those plays last year. Down the second half of the season. So it'll be an interesting one. And Adrian asked a good question. He says, what up, Jack and Rob? Does Mason have the Breida Mostert acceleration and speed? And I would say that's tough because Breida and Mostert were so darn explosive. But there was a couple of times where you saw him make one cut and he was down the field. So it's pretty impressive. I don't know if it's Breida Mostert, but it's pretty good.
It'd be nice to have that type of burst again. Again, it feels like a safer pick to go with Jeff Wilson Jr., but if you're looking to hit the home run with adding someone to the roster who might take you to the next level, again, the unknown quantity in the undrafted free agent rookie feels like the way to go. Yeah,
and real quick on that, the other thing too is that's partly why you said it'd be nice to have it. Well, that's why Deebo Samuel ran the ball so much over the second half of the year. And the only reason that might not be the case this year is because, again, we talked about the first 2 topics, the quarterback. If he's able to get those shot plays and he's able to be explosive in the passing game, the running game doesn't have to be the one that's carrying the load quite as much as it was with Jimmy Garoppolo. So we'll check that out. Really quick, I want to hit the super chat from Jeremy. He says, thank you very much for that one, $4.99. He says, my bad. Hat up, Rob. Those Cowboy fans think Deebo is going to Dallas. LOL. You guys take on that blasphemy. Deebo's not going to Dallas. Deebo Samuel's going to be a 49er.
That's right. Deebo is here. We are getting that deal done.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's a done deal that he's going to be with the team this season. Where's he going to be beyond this year? We'll find out. I think a deal is going to get done in the next month or so. But so Jeremy, no Cowboys. Tell them that Deebo is not going there. He is going to be a 49er.
I'm with you.
Yeah, and we got some good other comments. I'll get to those in a minute when we start getting to the throwback portion of it. But the last thing on the current 49ers I wanted to hit on was Trey Lance has taken over at quarterback. We hit on that. We talked about the running back room. Do you think that this team in 2022 offensively is going to be able to match what they did last season. Now, last year, the offense averaged 24.7 points per game. Do you think with Trey Lance, they're going to be able to match that?
So I've taken a couple of different routes on this one. Initially, I've made some predictions that I think this defense is going to be pretty elite. And therefore, people, when reaching out to me asking about how this offense will do, will point out, hey, this defense is going to be elite. You've said so yourself. And therefore, you may see closer games. You may see this offense sort of throttling back to match the defensive output that is being put on the field. If we're able to really hold teams to low scores, then you can play that sort of conservative, chew out the clock, run the ball considerable amounts, and just beat them in low scoring affairs. But I don't see that being the case here. I see the offensive production for the San Francisco 49ers being better in 2022. Trey gives you an added element that defenses have to prepare for. You're looking at a deeper running back room that should be able to maintain its health for greater chunks throughout this season because it is a deeper room with more options to fall back to after Elijah Mitchell. And I do expect this to be an elite defense in that I see more sacks, more turnovers, and therefore those should put the offense in better field position to score on some of those. And then I went back and looked at the teams we're going to play in 2022, how they fared in 2021. And there are some teams that we will be playing that struggled in defensive output, in holding opposing teams to low-scoring affairs. And I predict some blowouts. I think we're going to potentially blow out Atlanta, Carolina, Chicago, some other high-scoring affairs, Kansas City, L.A., all three times, against the Rams twice, and then against the Chargers as well. So I see a slight uptick in offensive production. I'm going to say that the 49ers end up closer to 27 points per game.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. That was the direction I was going to go, and I really like some of the things you said because I think that part of their success, even going back to 2019, was really built off of what the defense was able to do and the field position that they were able to get. We've talked about this so much this offseason because the 49ers spent a lot of their free agency period going after free agents that are going to come in and help out with special teams and can be backups on offense and defense and so on. But if you go back to that team in 2019, they were I think they had the fourth best starting field position in the league, and that just generates points for you. And so it allows you to have short fields. If you're set up to get at least a field goal right off the bat, it helps you out. And that's one of the reasons why even if you go back, let's take this all the way back to 2011 through 2014, when Jim Harbaugh was here. Remember how a bunch of people complained about those offenses in 11, 12, and 13? Yet those teams were always all 3 years. I think they were 11th in the league. They were very good in points scored, and a lot of that had to do with the defense giving them good field position, right, consistently. So I'm with you on that. I think the defense is going to help out the offense. It's going to help with Lance getting himself going. His starts last year weren't impressive from a point scored standpoint, but I think that you put it all together, and I could see them getting to the 27. 26, a number better than 24.7 for sure.
I'm with you. I will take those points, Jack. A dominant defense that's racking up sacks and turnovers and an offense that is scoring points is going to be a game that's worth watching.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And for me, we're going to get to this in a minute. I love defense. I don't care. I don't necessarily need to see high scoring. If I wanted to see a 55-44 game or something like that, I'd go watch arena football. I like the physical, I like the physical nature of football. It's one of the things I like about Kyle Shanahan's run game and the fact that they do, tend to pound the ball at times. Although the PFF guys don't really seem to think that that's efficient. I like it. Taking a little bit of shot there at some of the things that we've seen come out from that group over the weekend. But I think they're going to be good. I think Trey Lance is going to develop as the season goes along, and I think you're on the money with some of those games. Now, really quick, before we move on to our next topic, I want to bring this question up. I didn't prep you for this because it wasn't going to be one of our topics, but it leads right into kind of a throwback theme of what we're going to do.
All right.
So Andrew asked me, how can you rank George Seifert behind Shanahan? And that's that's a reference to the article that I have up at 49ers.pressdemocrat.com, where I ranked George Seifert behind Kyle Shanahan. I actually ranked George Seifert as the 4th best coach in the 49ers history. And when I talk about 49ers history, I'm really talking about 79 till now, because that's really their golden years, right, where they've been really successful. I guess you could probably throw Dick Nolan in there too, maybe in that top 5 if you want to, because I think he had 3 straight years. I think they were in the championship game, or at least they were close in the 70, 71, 72. They were pretty good there. But yeah, I have George Seifert below Kyle Shanahan. And here's the reasoning. And I mentioned it in the article. I think that part of Seifert's success was the team that he took over.
Right.
He took over a team that had just won the Super Bowl. He took over a team that had not 1, but 2 future Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Had the best,
just unfair,
right? It had the best wide receiver in the history of the game.
Yeah.
And he had all those things. So, and when you talk about 49ers history, yes, there were, it's very strong. And then you look and you see what he did when he didn't have those players, when he was in another organization. And I think that, it's always about the talent that you have to an extent. That's why Bill Walsh was so good, because Bill Walsh was able to build it. Bill Walsh built what George Seifert won with,
right,
all the way through. And then it was after Seifert, you saw it all fall apart under Mariucci, because what happened? Steve Young got hurt, and so they didn't have the Hall of Fame quarterback anymore. So it took them a couple of years to rebuild, and for Jeff Garcia to become a better quarterback, for T.O. to develop, and all those kinds of things. So. That's how I rank George Seifert behind Shanahan. I just feel that that a lot of his success was based on what was there before him. And I don't think that Shanahan had, well, obviously he didn't. Shanahan walked into a situation much more similar to Bill Walsh than really any of the other 3 coaches that I have on the list.
I see people mentioning, as I was in my own head, Barry Switzer, right, for the Cowboys, coming in for Jimmy Johnson. And I do think it's a different situation than that. I would give George Seifert credit for what he was able to build with that defense, and the idea that he was there with the team in helping to create that team with Walsh and then taking over. But I tend to agree what I see from Coach Shanahan in his ability to orchestrate offenses and really put something out there on the field that you don't typically see from other teams, that you haven't seen from other offenses. And that starts with Shanahan and then matriculates out to the rest of the league as people do copy what it is he's putting out there. You also just have to acknowledge that offense is more exciting than defense. I mean, you and I are old school in that regard. I love watching defense, so I would actually give George Seifert the nod there for having put together an elite defense in the way that he did. Yeah, he took over a wildly successful team. I don't know how many head coaches walk into a situation where you have 2 future Hall of Famers in the quarterback room. That might be the only time that's happened. It may have happened once or twice else in the NFL, but that is something you have to take into account. The 2017 49ers certainly did not have 2 future Hall of Fame quarterbacks taking over there. And so I tend to agree. I might want to go the direction of giving Seifert the benefit of the doubt until Kyle surpasses him in actual accomplishments. But as long as we're talking about, potential and putting that in there, yeah, I can't fault you for putting Coach Shanahan above Coach Seifert.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of it too. I think maybe that plays in a little bit to it is that I see more. People are going to kill me for this one. I see more of a Bill Walsh in him, in Kyle Shanahan, than I see in the other ones. Again, it's a similar situation, right? Shanahan walked into Walsh and Shanahan both walked into just dumpster fires. It took them a couple of years to figure it out. It took them a couple of years to get a quarterback that was capable of running their system. And once they had that guy and what have you, again, I'm not comparing Jimmy Garoppolo to Joe Montana. That's not what I'm saying. But once they got the quarterback position right, they were winners. And when you look at the records over their first 5 years, Shanahan has a better record than Walsh. So yeah, I put him there. Actually, the biggest problem for me wasn't putting Seifert 4th. It was actually, do I put Shanahan at 2? Or I put Jim Harbaugh at 2, and I went with Jim Harbaugh.
I can't fault you for that either. I mean, Harbaugh, that's a tough article that you had to write there. I have yet to read it. I saw the tweet saying that was up. I need to get in and dig into that because that's a fascinating topic that you went about there. I would almost compare, like, when I look at George Seifert coming in, Kyle Shanahan being a super exciting offensive coordinator / head coach, I look at it as you can have exciting, but like not inspirational. So I will be thrilled if and when DeMeco Ryans is hired away as a head coach for Vic Fangio to roll back in as the defensive coordinator. I would look at him as like George Seifert stepping in as a head coach. You're not going to get some sort of revolutionary system, but things are going to be executed at a level of consistency. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's been doing it for a long time. You know what you're going to get from that individual. Whereas hiring someone like Kyle Shanahan, I would equate more towards the team that is hiring DeMeco Ryans, where you've got this up-and-comer. It is a very exciting hire. You don't know what the ceiling is, but you also don't really know what the floor is. With George Seifert or, bringing in our defensive coordinator next year, you see a higher floor, maybe not the same ceiling on it.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a really good one there. No, that's and then real quick, Lukey comes in and he says, Luke Walsh says, Dick Nolan was very underrated. Joe Thomas trashed much of the memory of Nolan's accomplishments. And you're right. I mean, Nolan, like I said, 70, 71, and 72, I think it was those 3 years. They were very good teams. In San Francisco, they just couldn't get by the Cowboys.
Plus, you got the suits. So, I mean, that's just money.
Yeah, well, that was back in those days. That was the deal, right? That's why Mike wanted to wear a suit on the sidelines. He just couldn't match the win-loss record.
That's right.
Kind of changing gears though, since he was talking about Dick Nolan, let's kind of stick on the throwback theme. You and I have gone back and forth a lot on our history with the team, and I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite Candlestick Park memory?
This one is interesting because I was just reminded of it recently. The Notorious GAV retweeted a video that I put out a while back. I mean, during last summer, about a year ago now, where I talked about a Candlestick memory and why I was upset with Jed York, and also why I have, at least one fond memory. So my best memory of Candlestick Park isn't actually because of a game. It's because of an experience. Well, it was a game. It was just an atrocious game. It was a game that we got our asses handed to us, Jack. It was a game that sitting in the stands was rough. October 11th, 2009 versus the Atlanta Falcons. October 11th is 10 days prior to my birthday. I got tickets to this game from Jed York. He gave them to my dad and I. He gave us field passes and 50-yard line seats. We were thrilled. We had been going to Candlestick for about 30 years at that point, and had not been 20 years at that point, and had not been on the field, had not touched the grass at Candlestick Park. So that was absolutely something I will never forget. Walking down there, touching the grass, walking around, seeing the players at eye level, my dad and I sharing that. We met a kicker enthusiast who was one of the photographers on the field. He had on a Joe Nedney jersey and would go around the league and follow the kickers. And his buddy who was with him had on, I forget who our punter was at the time, but had on the punter at that time. So the pregame was amazing. I mean, just one of those experiences, picked the grass off the ground, gave it a smell, had those vibes of on the field at Candlestick frickin' Park. Yes. And then the game started, Jack, and it was awful. We ended up losing that one 45-10. 45-10. Roddy White went off. He had 8 catches for 210 yards, 2 touchdowns. One of them was an 80 or a 90-yard freaking score. It still remains one of my favorite memories. Some unique stats from it. You don't get this often, but both Glenn Coffey and Matt Ryan had rushing touchdowns in that game. I mean, how many of those could there be out there, right? And the rushing leader for San Francisco was Sean Hill as quarterback, 4 carries for 53 yards.
Nice. Sean Hill. with the
It
wheels.
was a brutal game.
Who could forget the wheels on Sean Hill? That guy, he looks like the athletic quarterback, right?
I'm telling you, he was an athletic freak. The last dual threat quarterback we had before Trey Lance, Sean Hill.
Yeah, Sean Hill. That's awesome. No, that's a really good memory. I saw that video, Rob, and I got to say, I was a little, I was a little jealous of the Candlestick Park seats that you were sitting in, and yeah, just a smidge. That was nice. The production value of that show was pretty darn good as well.
I appreciate it.
I will say for me, it's similar, right? It's for me, it's not even a game. It's the memory for me when I think of Candlestick Park. It's used to park up on Jamestown, up on the hill.
Yes.
And so we would walk down the hill into the
insiders know.
That's right, because it was easiest way to get in and out of that place.
Yep.
And we'd walk down the hill and we just walk across the bridge, and it dropped you off right onto the first level. And we walk, but it was walking from there to the seats, and it was opening the doors to get into the stadium, right? Because they had those swinging doors at each of the openings because of the little tunnel on the way there. But it was opening the door and seeing the field and smelling the stadium. For me, that's when I think of Candlestick Park. In my eye right now, I can still see walking into Section 2, opening up the door and seeing the field and what it looked like.
It got so bright when it was a nice sunny day and those doors would open and that bright green grass would reflect the light at you. That really was something to feel that walking in. Man, Candlestick, good memories.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing too with that is I remember I think it was a playoff game against the Philadelphia Eagles, and it was raining so hard. It was nice because we sat under the overhang, so we didn't ever have to worry about getting wet. But there was this one game trying to get into the stadium because we couldn't barbecue that day because it was so rainy. We ended up on that bridge, huddled up against the side so that the rain that was coming down sideways wouldn't hit us. But yeah, good times at Candlestick Park, that's for darn sure.
Absolutely.
I'd go back if that place was still there and the 49ers were there. I would go. It would be just fantastic. I think they never should have left. And
we'll leave it there. Love it.
We'll leave it there. But let's go one more before we close off for today.
Let's do it.
How about this? If you could get in a time capsule and you could go back to one game at Candlestick Park or wherever it is, one 49er game that you want to go to, what game would it be?
This was hard because there are, we were both blessed to be at a lot of pretty incredible games in the time frame that our families happen to be going to Candlestick. And I was tempted to pick out one of the games that I don't remember so much because I was at some really spectacular games in the late 80s where I was still a pre-teenager at that point. And so my memory of those games is poor. And yet they were some historically relevant games. So if I had more time to comb through all of the games I was potentially at, bounce off with my dad and my brother, which ones I was at versus my brother and my dad, I would have maybe picked out a playoff game from 88, 89. There were some potentially spectacular games to pick from. The 94 game, the NFC Championship game against Dallas was a great one. Certainly, that was a spectacular game. But I had to pick the one that had the most sentimental value to me, the most emotion attached to it. To me, it was in the 2011 postseason. It was that Saints game at Candlestick Park. It was the ending sequence to that game. First of all, it started with the phenomenal hit that I think it was Dante Whitner laid on. Was that Deuce McAllister that he laid out there? It was someone on the Saints where he basically knocked him out. That became a fumble, and that set the physical matchup for the game. But it was the ending of it. You had the Alex Smith end around with about 2 minutes left in the game. He follows Joe Staley to the promised land. It feels like the frickin' 49ers are going to win this playoff game. My dad, my brother, and I are in the stands losing it absolutely going nuts. And then the Saints march right back down the field and they put up a touchdown to Jimmy Graham, and our hearts are ripped out of our chests, right? There's not nearly enough time left for the Niners and their low scoring offense with Alex Smith at the helm to come back. It took the trick play on the end around to get it the last time, but no, they had one more drive in them, and it was the throw to Vernon Davis. The glory for Vernon Davis at the end of the game. That was just, it was the high, low, high again that really got me in that. I can see my father's face when they scored that touchdown on us with less than 2 minutes to go. When Jimmy Graham scored that touchdown, I can see his face sink as if to say, that's it. That's the end of this game. And then the shock when we actually get it into the end zone to Vernus to end the game, it was one of those games you walk out feeling like you're on a cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That would have been a great one. I remember watching that game on TV feeling that way. And Ellen points out really quick, his name was Pierre Thomas.
Pierre Thomas.
That was the running back that Hittner knocked out and fumbled the ball in the goal line there and stopped the drive, and the 49ers took it from there. But yeah, no, that was a good one. I remember watching that game on TV. Yeah, and I mean the ups and downs, and oh my gosh, they're gonna, they're blowing them out, and then all of a sudden they come back and everything. That was a wild one.
Yes, it was.
If you remember at the beginning of that game, the 49ers got turnover after turnover, and they just couldn't put the Saints away.
Right.
For me, I've gone back and forth on this one so many times. And it's people of our age. I think if you were a Niner fan in the 80s and 90s, there's one team that stands out above everybody. Well, maybe two, but one of the teams that always stands out is the New York Giants.
Ooh, yes.
I know everybody thinks of the Dallas Cowboys, but in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, it was the 49ers and the Giants. That was a rivalry, and they had some tough physical games, and I'd like to say for me that it would be the Giants comeback game in the playoffs, right, where they were behind by 38-14, and they come back and they win. And it was a very similar game to kind of what you're talking about in the Saints game, because they have this big comeback. You're just feeling like they're going to lose. They have this big comeback, and then the Giants drive right down the field. It looks like the 49ers are going to lose on a field goal at the end of the game, and then you have the exaltation of the botched fumble, and then what should have been a pass interference call get blown by the referees and all that kind of stuff. I'd love to go with that game. But for me, it was the Monday night game in 1990 between the 49ers and the Giants. 7-3 was the final score. I go with that one. That was my dad and I, my brother and I are the ones that had the season tickets. But for whatever reason, that Monday night, my brother couldn't go. So it was my dad and I. And we rode up on a bus with a bunch of his friends, and they kind of had like a little party bus that we went up on. And then just that game was just such a physical game. Ronnie Lott and Phil Simms' face at the end. And the one thing that I remember other than the game was walking out of the stadium. We're walking around through it, and some fan was up in the box, not the box, but the suites. And back then the Giants and the 49ers, they were big rivals. And so you always had a lot of back and forth. And there was somebody up there, and he was throwing dollar bills out of the suite, and everybody was trying to collect them. It was the craziest thing. And I was a senior in high school, and I'll never forget it.
That's glorious. Those Giants, I mean, there was still animosity for me when we lost to them in that 2011 postseason, right, where we had that NFC Championship game because of those struggles in the late 80s and 90s. That was a ferocious rivalry. I think most people tend to lean towards the Dallas rivalry, but talk about physical games against that frickin' New York defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things about that NFC Championship game that you're referencing in 2020 after the 2011 season, is that was a slobber knocker of a game too. It was kind of a early, late 80s, early 90s Bill Parcells, Bill Walsh, George Seifert type of game. Very similar in the physicality of it.
Yes, it was.
And then real quick, Lee asks, Jerry Rice dropping the ball on the way to score. That was in New York. Yes, it was. It was in New York, had the pass over the middle, and he is streaking for a touchdown. And drops the ball, and it rolls out through the end zone for a touchback. So instead of a touchdown, it's now Giants ball in the 20.
Brutal.
Good times, good times. Way to bring us down, Lee. No, but then you also have, if you to bring us back, I'll throw out the 1988, the touchdown from Joe Montana to Jerry Rice down the right sideline as late in the fourth quarter to take the victory, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
Yes. Thankfully, there are a lot of victories to choose from back in the 80s and 90s.
Absolutely. No, so that was my favorite. Rob, I always appreciate you coming on, and it's always fun to talk to you on Mondays.
I agree, man. I enjoy talking about our current day 49ers, and I love going back and talking about the Niners in their heyday.
Yeah, we need to keep doing this throughout the next few weeks, because we got about 5 weeks before this season starts. And I think it's a lot more fun to be talking about some of the old stuff than the new stuff. We can get into some more debates. As you can see, people really don't like me putting George Seifert number 4 on the list.
No, they don't. They don't like the disrespect, Jack.
No, they did disrespecting one of the legends of the, and he really is a legend of the 49ers.
Yes, no doubt. That's a list of very impressive coaches, and where you fall on it doesn't necessarily reflect anything poorly about you. It says something positive about the rest of the guys on the list.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing when I was kind of researching it was just the amount of success that the 49ers have had since 1979. Like it was 12 or 15 trips to the NFC Championship game, over 20 NFC West titles. I mean, it's been ridiculous over the last 43 years. So, real quick before we move on, Rob, what's coming up on your channel this week?
I will be doing the vaunted mailbag episode that is everyone's favorite tomorrow. It's looking to be hot. So I've had the request to do it from out in those Candlestick Park seats that previous video was in. I'm not so sure that tomorrow is going to be the day that happens, but you will look out. Some mailbag within these next 4 or 5 weeks will be sitting out in the Candlestick Park seats. It will be outside, free for all. Who knows what'll happen? But yes, I'll be on tomorrow at 5 p.m. I'll be sending out the tweet asking for people's 49ers mailbag submissions, whether it is current day Niners, past Niners, or food related, car related. Now that George Kittle has gone out and got himself an American muscle car, I'm taking the credit for him having thought of that, because on my show on the mailbag 2 weeks ago, we started talking about American muscle cars, and George Kittle goes out and gets his very own. So I'm guessing he was inspired by our show tomorrow at 5 p.m. If somebody has a question they want to send in right now, they can email me at 49ersmailbag@gmail.com.
There you go. Perfect. Make sure you get over to Rob's channel, subscribe to him if you're not already. It's always fun over there. And real quick, before I close the show, Andrew tells me that my article was clickbait, which I think goes perfect with the fact that George Seifert likes to fish in Bodega Bay. So maybe he's using my article to help catch his fish. I don't know. But while you're here, if you like what you see, if you could please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button before you leave. That'd be fantastic. And also a little bell notification so you know when we go live. Just want to say thanks to everybody in the comment section. Thanks again to Rob for being a gracious co-host on Monday with me. He always comes on, whether he wants to or not. I just wrangle him in. So thanks to everybody for joining. Have a great rest of your Monday. I'll be back tomorrow with our buddy, Sobrio Sunil. Until then, have a great rest of your Monday, everybody.
Cheers.
Take care, you guys.
We'll have to get your favorite muscle car on the program on Friday.
I will have to. I will have to see what I can do. I don't know what's going on. My stream is not shutting down yet. We're still live. But I would think if you want my muscle car, it would probably have to be a I think what is it? The Dodge. There's a Dodge Dart. Is that what it? Not a Dart.
Ooh, the Dodge Dart's good. The